Hi, I'm Laura, and this video is part 2 to the mystery of the sacred union. In that first video, we talked about how the Disney version of The Little Mermaid relates to the union between the divine feminine Christ and the divine masculine Christ. And in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the Hans Christian Andersen version of The Little Mermaid and how this relates to the sacred union. Before we talk about the Little Mermaid connection, first we need to discuss Adam, Eve, and Lilith. Lilith was Adam's first wife, who refused to be submissive to him and be dominated by him. So they had a bit of a fallout, and Lilith was replaced with Eve, a more submissive counterpart. Now, the representation of Lilith, Adam, and Eve is a depiction of what happened with the patriarchy, where the patriarchy took complete domination in a very toxic form over the feminine, pushed the divine feminine out of the materialistic world, and continued to rule on its own with a submissive partner or counterpart. The original Little Mermaid, the Hans Christian Andersen version, does not end as lovely as the Disney version. What happens in this version is the Little Mermaid she pretty much fails at having the prince fall in love with her. The prince ends up falling in love with what we would consider Eve from the Garden of Eden, the submissive version or submissive counterpart, and she's given a choice. The witch, who would be considered Ursula in the Disney version, tells the Little Mermaid that if she can take a dagger and murder the prince and his new wife, then she can still become a human. But if she doesn't, she will die. So what happens is Ariel refuses to kill the prince. She loves him too much. She loves him unconditionally, and she then ascends to the spiritual realm. In the story, Ariel takes the high road. She doesn't lower herself down to resentment and anger, and she sacrifices herself. And she's told that if she can serve humanity, then there's a possibility that she can become a human again in 300 years or maybe sooner. The Little Mermaid is the representation of Mary Magdalene, the healed feminine, the divine feminine. Now, if we look at the story of Adam and Eve and Lilith, you see that Lilith was not quite there yet. Understandably, she was pretty resentful, and she got turned into a representation of a demon, and she continued to be demonized throughout the history of the patriarchy. What's interesting is that Ariel, or Mary Magdalene, the divine feminine, is not treated fairly for the sacrifice that she does for the masculine. We can see this with the Catholic Church and the patriarchy in general, how they have labeled Mary Magdalene as a prostitute, as a whore, and not as the counterpart of Christ. What the toxic masculine did and the patriarchy did was they reduced the divine feminine to an object to be lusted after. And you can see that in ancient Greece with hetera, who were high-class prostitutes who were used by elite masculines who would go to them to get sexual favors and intellectual discussions. What we see here is that the toxic masculine's ego allows him to continue this game where he has his cake and he eats it too. He has kept his wife, the submissive version of the feminine, so that he can maintain the patriarchy, and then keeps the divine feminine in the shadows and goes to her kind of as a side chick, right? To get his spiritual enlightenment and intuition fill up when he needs it. The toxic masculine's shadow counterpart is the toxic feminine, the Jezebel, the whore of Babylon, who is the dark mother whose main purpose is to keep the masculine on top, keep the patriarchy going, cling to the old systems and the institutions and block evolution, and stop the masculine from ever uniting or allowing the divine feminine to rise and serve as his counterpart. The Jezebel spirit is a representation of the masculine's distorted internal feminine, who continues to cling to ego and materialism and greed in order to maintain power and in order to maintain domination over the divine feminine. She is what blocks him from reaching the sacred union of divine masculine and divine feminine. But because a system that's built on oppression and domination can never be sustainable, because this is not the law of the universe, the Bible speaks of the downfall of Babylon and the impending downfall of future patriarchies that are built on this toxic masculine foundation. Until the masculine is able to accept the feminine, we will continue to see this. The masculine must sacrifice his pride and his ego, his titles, his power, and incorporate the divine inner feminine or the spiritual realm in order to create balance and solidify the sacred union here on the earth. This is prophecy, and this is destined. If we look at ancient history and rituals, we see that the sacred marriage has been sort of replicated in a way through the temples where sacred prostitution was involved, and men were able to visit these temples in order to have sex with the divine feminine energy and then return back to the patriarchy. Christ was actually able to achieve the authentic sacred union with Mary Magdalene, but the church hid this information because they knew that this would be the end of the patriarchy and that people would no longer be controllable. For more information on how the inner union stops us from being controlled, you can check out my video on unlocking your creative genius. Mary Magdalene to this day is continuously represented as beneath Christ and not his counterpart, as we continue to worship the whore of Babylon, the toxic feminine, as the divine feminine. So there's this confusion here where the feminine has been switched in order to keep people enslaved and imprisoned and in the dark. What Christ and Mary Magdalene came to teach us is that a whole, healed, feminine and masculine in union together, serving as one, is possible for all of us, and that we can break out of our karmic cycles, break out of the matrix, and free ourselves and live in this divine union, which is our birthright. The union of Christ and Mary Magdalene is the physical representation of the healing of the separation that occurred after the fall of Atlantis, where the king and the queen had a fallout, and Lilith was sent into the darkness, and the toxic masculine replaced her with a toxic version of the feminine. Our purpose here on earth is to heal and integrate all the toxic, distorted versions of the masculine and feminine so that we can achieve the inner union within ourselves. Sacred union between the masculine and the feminine is our destiny. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment. You'll also find a link below for donations to support my work so that I can continue to put out content like this for free. Thanks so much for watching.